My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I am 64 years old, and for nearly half my life, the house on Maple Drive had been the one place I never questioned. I painted the kitchen walls a soft butter yellow after my husband Daniel died because I needed sunlight somewhere inside my life. I wanted a color that could hold warmth when everything else had gone gray. For years, it worked. That evening, the smell of rosemary and pot roast drifted through the dining room, mixing with candle wax, perfume, and the sharp little laughter of people I barely knew. It was my son Caleb's 34th birthday. He looked handsome beneath the chandelier, the new one his wife Sienna had ordered for the room without asking me. I was carrying a silver tray of forks and knives from the kitchen when Sienna turned toward me. Her smile remained perfectly pleasant. Her voice did not. "I didn't invite you, Eleanor." The tray seemed to grow heavier. For one strange second, I thought she meant someone else. Maybe one of the neighbors. Maybe there was some misunderstanding involving the caterer. Then she looked directly at me. "I didn't invite you," she repeated, quieter this time, as though speaking slowly might make the humiliation easier for me to understand. Around the table, conversation died. A man Caleb worked with suddenly found his wine fascinating. One of Sienna's friends looked at the centerpiece as if flowers could rescue her from the moment. Caleb's fingers tightened around his glass, but he said nothing. I looked at the table. 25 years earlier, I had driven across town to choose that oak myself. Caleb had been 8 then, skinny knees sticking out of a pair of school shorts, impatient because I had taken too long comparing wood finishes. Every plate on that table had passed through my hands. Every chair had once held someone I loved. I set down the tray carefully. "Of course," I said. My voice sounded strangely distant. I wouldn't want to ruin the picture. Sienna gave me a thin smile. Then she leaned toward Caleb and whispered something. He nodded without looking at me. I didn't ask what she had said. I walked out, past the hallway where Daniel's photograph hung slightly crooked, past the living room where his walnut rocking chair had vanished, past the kitchen painted the same butter yellow it had been for 17 years. I stepped onto the porch and breathed in the cold air. Rain was coming. I could smell wet earth and leaves. Inside, everyone began talking again. I sat down on the top step and stared at the yard. That was when I finally admitted something I had spent months trying not to see. The house hadn't changed all at once. I had simply let myself disappear from it. I had bought the house with Daniel in the kind of spring that makes every future feel possible. We had been married 11 years when we found it. A weathered 2-story place with narrow hallways, uneven floors, and a maple tree in the front yard that was barely taller than Caleb. The realtor called the place a project. Daniel called it ours. We refinished the floors ourselves. He built shelves for the den. I planted peonies along the porch because my mother had loved them. When Caleb was sick, I slept on the couch beside him so I could hear him breathe. When Daniel lost his job for 6 months, we ate simple meals and laughed about it later. There had been difficult years in that house, but there had also been birthdays, graduations, Christmas mornings, and ordinary Tuesdays that somehow became precious simply because all 3 of us were there. After Daniel died, I stayed because leaving felt like losing him twice. The house carried his habits. His coffee mug sat by the sink for months before I could put it away. His shoes remained in the closet long after I knew I would never hear them on the stairs again. Grief had made me protective of every familiar thing, and when Caleb came home with his wife and little boy, I thought I was opening the door to a second chapter. I never considered that someone could walk through that same door and slowly convince me that the first chapter no longer mattered. It began the winter Caleb first asked whether he and Sienna could stay for a few months. They had lost their apartment after a heating problem left the place almost unlivable, and rents in Brookvale had risen beyond what they could manage. They had their 4-year-old son, Miles, and Caleb's voice over the phone sounded embarrassed when he asked, "Mom, I swear it's temporary." I hadn't even let him finish. "Of course you can come home." Home. That was the word I used without hesitation. This is your home, too. At first, having them there felt wonderful. The house had been too quiet since Daniel died. Suddenly there were small shoes near the back door, cartoon music coming from the den, Miles's laughter bouncing down the hallway, Caleb opening the refrigerator at midnight and asking whether I had any leftovers. I loved every minute of it, or almost every minute. Sienna was different, not cruel at first, just decisive. She asked whether she could update the guest room. "It's only cosmetic," she said. "I'll pay for everything." 2 days later, the floral curtains I'd sewn myself were gone. In their place hung pale gray linen. My antique lamp disappeared too. When I asked where it had gone, Sienna pointed toward the garage. "I thought you'd want it stored somewhere safe." She said it as if she had done me a favor. I swallowed my irritation. "It's temporary," I reminded myself. Then the dining chairs disappeared. "Those are pretty worn," Sienna said one afternoon. "I kind of like them." She laughed. "Caleb, your mom has sentimental feelings about furniture." Caleb smiled awkwardly. "They've been here forever." "Exactly," she replied. "That's the problem." The chairs were boxed up before I could stop them. A week later, I came home from the Brookvale Senior Center and noticed the living room felt wrong. I stood in the doorway trying to understand why. Then I saw the empty corner. Daniel's rocking chair was gone. It was a walnut chair he had sanded by hand before Caleb was born. The arms were polished smooth from decades of his hands. Daniel had read bedtime stories in it. He had sat there after long shifts at the hospital. After he died, I couldn't bear to move it. I found it in the garage behind a stack of unopened shipping boxes. Sienna was standing nearby. "Oh," she said. "That thing?" I stared at her. "What thing?" She shrugged. It didn't fit the new look. I wanted to tell her that the chair wasn't a decorative object. It was one of the few pieces of Daniel I could still touch. Instead, I said, "I'll put it back later." She smiled. "You really should let me help you modernize this place." Modernize. The word stayed with me. So did the silence of my son. Caleb never told her to stop. Whenever I tried to talk to him privately, he would rub his neck and say the same thing. "She just wants the house to feel nice, Mom." Nice. Soon the kitchen became her project. She didn't like the butter yellow walls. "It's too old-fashioned," she said, "and it photographs terribly." I looked at her. Photographs? She had started an online home design account, posting pictures of rooms, furniture, and renovations. One afternoon, I walked in and found her filming the kitchen. She spoke brightly to her camera. "This space has so much potential. We're taking it from dated to modern without changing the layout." I stepped into the frame by accident. Her smile vanished. "Oh, could you move?" I did. Later, my neighbor Patricia came over with a pie. She stood in my doorway, slowly scanning the new light fixtures, the square plates, the rearranged furniture. "Are you sure this is still your house?" she asked. I laughed. "Don't start." She gave me the look only a long-time neighbor can give. "You keep joking about it, Eleanor, but you've been apologizing for things you own." I had no answer. Sienna moved my family photographs too. The picture of Daniel holding 6-year-old Caleb at the lake was taken off the mantel because it broke the symmetry. She moved it to a hallway table. I found my mother's porcelain bowl in a cupboard I never used. My spice jars were alphabetized. My old curtains were replaced. My favorite armchair was covered with a cream throw because it needed to look cleaner. Each individual change was small. Together, they became a message. You live here because we allow it. The chandelier was the clearest message. It arrived in a giant box on a Thursday afternoon. I found Sienna standing beneath the ceiling, watching 2 installers mount a glittering fixture where Daniel's old brass chandelier had hung for 20 years. It looked expensive and cold. "That's beautiful," I said carefully. "Thank you." "How much was it?" She waved her hand. "Caleb put it on his card." I looked toward my son. He wasn't there. A week later, the birthday dinner happened. And then came those 7 words. I didn't invite you. After Patricia left my porch that night, I sat alone for nearly an hour. The apple pie she had brought sat untouched beside me. Then she said something I couldn't forget. Call the lawyer I told you about. I looked at her. Why? Because some people only understand a boundary when it's written down. The next morning, I made an appointment with a lawyer named Naomi Chen. Naomi was in her 40s, composed, direct, and refreshingly unimpressed by family drama. She asked me one question first. Who owns the house? I do. Only you? Only me. The mortgage. Paid off 6 years ago, she leaned back. Then, we need to separate 2 things. Your love for your son and your legal right to decide who occupies your property. I felt tears gather in my eyes. I don't want to hurt Caleb. Naomi nodded. I believe you, but you've confused keeping the peace with protecting yourself. No one had said it that plainly before. Naomi helped me understand what I could legally enforce and what required proper notice. She told me not to change locks, remove belongings, threaten anyone, or make emotional decisions. Do everything in writing, she said. Keep copies, communicate calmly, and don't sign anything you haven't reviewed. That afternoon, I made a list. 3 simple house rules. No structural, decorative, or household changes without my written approval. No parties, contractors, realtors, or other business activity at the property without my permission. No representation of the property as jointly owned or available for sale. I printed the rules. I signed my name. Then I taped them to the refrigerator. Sienna came home first. Her heels clicked against the tile. She stopped. What is this? House rules. She read them twice. Then she laughed. Are you serious? Very. Eleanor, we're family. Exactly. Her expression tightened. We shouldn't need paperwork to live together. I shouldn't need paperwork to feel safe in my own home. Caleb came in 20 minutes later. He looked at the page, then at me. Mom, read it. He did. His eyes dropped. Was this because of the party? That was part of it. Sienna crossed her arms. You are making this much bigger than it is. I looked at her. You told me I wasn't invited to my own son's birthday dinner in my own house. He wanted a private celebration. Then he should have had one somewhere else. Caleb flinched. Sienna stepped closer. You know, maybe this house isn't practical for you anymore. I felt the old instinct to soften my response. This time I resisted. It's not for sale. You don't know what you're giving up? I know exactly what I'm keeping. She stared at me. The next morning, Daniel's rocking chair came back into the living room. I sat in it that night and listened to the old wood creak beneath me. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like a visitor. I should have known that wouldn't end it. A week later, I was at the senior center shaping clay when Patricia called. Eleanor, don't panic. I froze. Why would I panic? There's a silver SUV at your house. My stomach dropped. What kind? Real estate logo on the side. Some man is taking pictures. I put down the clay. I'll be home in 10 minutes. When I reached Maple Drive, the front gate was open. A man in khakis stood on the porch with a camera. Sienna was beside him. She was pointing toward the roof. I got out of my car. What is happening? The man turned. Mrs. Whitmore? Yes. I'm Graham Ellis with Northfield Realty. We're preparing preliminary materials for the property listing. I stared at him. The what? Sienna stepped forward. We're getting an appraisal. No, she blinked. No? This house isn't being listed. Graham looked uncomfortable. I was told the owners were considering a sale. Then you were told something untrue. I opened my purse and handed him the copy of the deed Naomi had told me to carry. Please verify the ownership before you take another photograph. He read the document. His face changed. I'm very sorry. He lowered the camera. I was told this was a joint property. It isn't. He apologized again and left. The second the SUV disappeared, I turned toward Sienna. You invited a realtor to my property. We're trying to solve a problem. What problem? You. The word hit harder than the insult at the dinner. She didn't look away. This house is too large for you. Caleb and I could sell it, pay off our debts, and get you somewhere smaller. I stared at her. Our debts? Caleb came up the street in his truck. He had arrived early from work, confusion on his face. What happened? I looked at him. Your wife tried to arrange the sale of my house. His shoulders dropped. Sienna spoke quickly. We were only exploring options. What debts? I asked. Caleb looked away. I understood immediately. The chandelier, I said. The furniture, all those things. How much? Mom, it's not what you think. How much? He swallowed. Almost $28,000. I closed my eyes. $28,000 spent changing a house they did not own. Sienna's voice sharpened. We thought we'd eventually buy it. You never asked. We knew you'd say no. There it was, the truth. Caleb stared at the ground. I looked at my son. He had once been the little boy racing through this hallway with muddy shoes. He had once cried in my lap after his first heartbreak. I had spent years teaching him the difference between right and wrong. Now he was standing silently while his wife tried to sell my home. Caleb, I said softly, why didn't you stop her? His eyes filled. I kept thinking I could fix it. You didn't. I know, Sienna snapped. He's trying to keep his family together. I turned to her. So am I. She folded her arms. Then let us stay. I shook my head. No, her face hardened. You can't throw us out. I can end this arrangement. Caleb closed his eyes. He knew. This time there was no argument. The $28,000 became another source of truth. Caleb showed me the credit card statements. The chandelier had cost more than I expected. So had the chairs. The new lighting, rugs, hardware, and bedroom furniture had been purchased in a dozen separate transactions that looked harmless by themselves. I looked at the totals. Why didn't you tell me? I thought we'd figure it out. How? He rubbed his eyes. I thought we'd buy the house eventually. But you had no agreement. I know. And you spent that money anyway. I know. His voice cracked on the second sentence. For the first time, I stopped seeing him as the grown man who had failed me and saw the frightened boy I had once held during thunderstorms. Caleb, I said, being afraid doesn't excuse what you did. I know, but it can explain it. He looked at me. I continued. You were trying to keep someone happy. He nodded. Don't spend your life doing that. Those words were as much for him as they were for me. He wiped his face. What if she leaves? Then you will still have yourself. I don't know who that is anymore. Then start finding him. He stared at me for a moment, and something in his expression changed. Not fixed, not healed, but awake. Naomi prepared a formal notice requiring them to vacate the property according to the applicable Illinois rules for their tenancy. I delivered it exactly as instructed, without shouting, without threats. 30 days. Sienna called me heartless. Caleb barely spoke. Miles was the only part that made me hesitate. He was 4. None of this was his fault. So I kept his routine steady. I still made pancakes on Saturday mornings. I still read him books when Caleb was working late, but the boundary remained. The first week after the notice, Sienna tried to persuade me. The second week, she became angry. The third week, she stopped speaking to me. Caleb, however, began changing. One evening, while Miles colored at the kitchen table, Caleb stood beside me. Mom, I kept washing dishes. Yes? I'm sorry. I turned. He looked exhausted. I should have said something months ago. Why didn't you? He looked toward his son. Because I was afraid she'd leave. She may still leave. I know. What do you want, Caleb? He was quiet for a long time. I want my son to remember that his dad did the right thing when it mattered. My hands went still. That was the first time I thought there might still be a way back to him. The notice changed the atmosphere immediately. Sienna began packing with furious efficiency, slamming drawers hard enough to make the cabinet doors rattle. One afternoon she cornered me in the hallway. "You've turned Caleb against me." "No," I said. "I stopped covering for you." She stared at me. "You think you're better than me because you own a house. I don't think I'm better than you." "Then why are you doing this?" "Because you crossed a line." Her eyes filled, but I couldn't tell whether it was anger or fear. "You don't understand what it's like trying to build a life. I understand more than you think. I've worked hard. Caleb has worked hard. We deserve a place of our own." "Then build one," I said. "But don't build it on top of mine." She looked stunned by the answer. I was stunned too. A year earlier I would have apologized for making her uncomfortable. Now I simply walked away. Caleb later found me in the kitchen. "She says you're punishing us." "I'm not. It feels like punishment. Boundaries often feel like punishment to people who benefited from having none." He sat at the table. After a long silence, he said, "I forgot this was Mom's house." I looked at him. "No, Caleb, you forgot who your mother was." He covered his face with his hands. I didn't touch him. Sometimes loving someone means allowing them to sit with a truth you can no longer carry for them. Moving day came on a gray morning. Boxes filled the hallway. Furniture was wrapped and carried out. The chandelier was taken down. For once, I didn't stop them. It wasn't mine. Neither was any of the decorative furniture she had bought. Daniel's rocking chair stayed. The butter yellow walls stayed. The oak table stayed. When the final box was loaded, Miles hugged me tightly. "Are you still my grandma?" I knelt and held him. "Always." He nodded, as if that settled everything. Caleb stood behind him. His eyes were red. "Thank you for taking care of him." "He's my grandson." He hugged me. It wasn't the warm embrace of childhood. It was awkward, adult, careful. But it was real. When the moving truck pulled away, I stood on the porch until I could no longer see it. Then I went inside. The silence was enormous. But it wasn't empty. It belonged to me. I spent the next 2 weeks putting things back. The family photo returned to the mantel. My mother's bowl came out of the cupboard. The dining chairs stayed exactly where I liked them. I repainted one small corner of the guest room myself. I cleaned the kitchen until every surface gleamed. And then I sat down in Daniel's chair. The house seemed to exhale. 2 months passed. Autumn settled over Brookvale. Maple leaves turned red along the street. One Saturday morning, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, Caleb stood there holding Miles's little backpack. "No Sienna." He looked nervous. "She's gone," he said. I waited. "She moved in with her mother. We've started the separation process." I looked at him carefully. "I'm sorry," he nodded. "I should have seen it sooner." We stood there in silence. Then he said, "I need help with Miles while I work." I looked at my grandson. He was carrying the same toy fire truck he had owned since the birthday party. I stepped aside. "Come in." Caleb smiled faintly. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." He laughed. I pointed toward the kitchen. "We're making some rules." He raised an eyebrow. "Rules?" 3 afternoons a week. You pick him up by 7. If you need extra time, you call. You don't assume. And this house stays peaceful. He nodded. "Understood." "And Caleb?" "Yes?" "Never again do you let someone make me feel like I don't belong in my own home." His face fell. "I won't." "I mean it." "So do I." The first afternoon Caleb left Miles with me after the separation began, my grandson asked why his parents lived in different places. I turned off the stove. "Sometimes grown-ups can't live well together," I said. "Did they fight?" "Sometimes." "Are you mad at Dad?" I crouched so we were eye to eye. "No." "Are you mad at Grandma Sienna?" I hesitated. "I was hurt." He considered that. "Can people be hurt and still love somebody?" The question nearly broke me. "Yes," I said. "They can." He nodded as if the answer made perfect sense. Then he held out the paper he had been drawing on. It was our house again. This time there were flowers in the yard. 3 windows glowed yellow. "That's your house," he said. "And this is my room when I visit." I smiled. "That's exactly right." He ran back to his crayons. I stood there for a moment, realizing how close I had come to believing that protecting my home meant losing my family. It didn't. What I had lost was an illusion. What remained was something stronger. That evening, I placed Daniel's photograph back above the fireplace. The butter-yellow kitchen glowed in the late sunlight. Miles was at the table drawing a crooked house with 3 stick figures in front of it. One was tall, one was small, one had enormous hair. I laughed. "Who's that?" "Grandma." "I have that much hair?" He nodded seriously. "Lots." I smiled. For months I had thought reclaiming my house meant reclaiming rooms, furniture, walls, and ownership. I was wrong. It meant reclaiming my voice. I had spent so long calling silence kindness that I forgot kindness without boundaries can become surrender. I hadn't stopped loving my son when I asked him to leave. I hadn't stopped loving my grandson when I made rules. I hadn't become cruel because I finally said no. I'd simply stopped disappearing. Outside, the maple trees rustled in the evening wind. The porch light clicked on. Inside, the old house held the sounds it had been missing. A child's laughter, a son's uncertain apology, my own footsteps moving freely from room to room, and beneath all of it, the steady creak of Daniel's rocking chair. For the first time in a long while, the house felt warm again. Not because everything was perfect, because it was honest. I touched the butter-yellow wall with my palm and whispered the word I should never have forgotten. Home. This time, the house remembered who I was.